The makers of Campbell Soups present The Campbell Playhouse. Orson Welles, producer.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles. Tonight we broadcast our version of what is generally regarded as one of the greatest of the modern mystery murder novels. In some peculiar fashion, it seems to have become necessary to defend the murder mystery as a form of entertainment. Heavy artillery is brought up in its behalf. President Wilson, it is proclaimed loudly, could not go to sleep or could go to sleep, one does not remember the point exactly, until a certain number of conflicting clues had managed to efface the days from his proof. And with a mystery solved only after suspicion has been aimed at every adult in the neighborhood, is not particularly shameful. I have never understood the need for this defense. Murder mysteries are, among other things, our most moral form of entertainment. The wrongdoer is regularly apprehended. If he is not, I have incredibly missed some fascinating black sheep of an author in a flock otherwise startlingly white. And one learns an obvious lesson that to be suspected wrongfully is in due course to be triumphantly cleared of suspicion. Life doesn't always proceed according to this admirable pattern. The apologists would do better to defend life, I sometimes think. To help us solve the mystery of the murder of Roger Ackroyd here tonight, we are fortunate in having a very powerful ally, a most distinguished lady and one of your favorite actresses. A lady in whose ears a nation's applause is still ringing for her latest brilliant success in Drums Along the Mohawk, Miss Edna May Oliver. But before we delve into the mysteries of this night's doings, Ernest Chappell has a comment to make on something which appears to be no mystery at all.
And now our Campbell Playhouse presentation of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd with our guest of the evening, Edna May Oliver. And ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I think you'd like to know that we have with us in the studio tonight, as a surprise visitor, none other than the celebrated Belgian detective, Mr. Hercule Poirot.
Ladies and gentlemen, I bid you good evening.
If we had time, which we have not, I'm sure nothing would please us more than to hear from Mr. Poirot. Unfortunately...
Why unfortunately when we have here a microphone?
But, Mr. Poirot, you don't understand.
I understand only that since my arrival in your country some weeks ago, I observed that there is circulate an impression of my person which I must now publicly refute. I trust that the embarrassment of my presence here tonight in Mr. Wells' studio will ensure from him an honest and lifelike portrait. It has been said that I am a little man. Regard for yourself that this is not so. I have 5 feet 2 inches of high. My head is perhaps egg-shaped, and I carry it perhaps a little to one side, the left, but my eyes shine green when I am excited. Beyond this, my mustache are the largest in Europe, and my force is in my brain and not in my feet. If these things are made clear, and Mr. Wells is a little tribute to Hercule Poirot, I will be satisfied. The results of my little gray cells will speak for themselves. If you will show me where I am to sit, please. I thank you.
This is Mr. Poirot, Miss Oliver.
How do you do?
Miss Oliver, you have often wanted to meet me, I am sure. I compliment you.
Please, Mr. Poirot. Ladies and gentlemen, our Campbell Playhouse presentation of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd.
Well, let me to start with give you some idea of the little village of King's Abbot, of which I have for so many years been the leading, I must admit, also the only physician and surgeon. My name, by the way, is Shepherd, James Shepherd. We have a large railway station, a small post office, 2 rival general stores, very few able-bodied men, a staggering number of unmarried ladies, none of whom are getting any younger, and an amazing number of retired military officers, all of whom are getting older. In fact, the only newcomer for many months lives next door to me, concerning whom little is known, despite the earnest and tireless investigations carried on in respect to him by my sister Caroline. Caroline and her little group of earnest ferrets, all maiden ladies like herself, have been forced to content themselves with the simple fact of his nationality, which is alien, of his name, which is Poirot, the obvious fact that he putters around his garden all day growing cucumbers, and the suspicion, based chiefly on malicious deductions, he's a retired hairdresser. Let's see now. The main house of any importance in King's Abbot is Fernley Hall, owned by Roger Ackroyd, who's always looked more like a country squire than any country squire could really look, but whose Actually, an immensely wealthy manufacturer of wagon wheels, nearly 50 years of age, rubicund of face and genial of manner, in general, the life and soul of our, to this week, the peaceful village. The other house of any importance had been left to Mrs. Ferrars by her late husband. Mrs. Ferrars died on the night of the 16th of September, a little less than a week ago. It seems longer than that. I was sent over for 8 o'clock the morning of the 17th. There was nothing to be done. She'd been dead some hours. I turned to my home as soon as I decently could, looking forward happily to the warm breakfast I had missed, and rather unhappily to the certainty of a relentless cross-examination by my sister Caroline.
Is that you, James? What on earth are you doing out there in the hall?
Just hanging up my overcoat, my dear.
Oh, Mrs. Ferrars died in her sleep, didn't she?
Bacon is cold. How did you know? Out with the dawn securing information instead of warming the bacon, is that it? I suppose you're going to tell me she died of heart failure.
Annie told me. The milkman told her. He had it from Ferrars' cook.
Since you're bound to hear sooner or later, Caroline, from the greengrocer or the postman, I might as well tell you myself. She died of an overdose of sleeping medicine. She hadn't been sleeping well lately.
Nonsense. She took it on purpose.
Well, now, why on earth should Mrs. Ferrars wish to commit suicide? A widow, still fairly young, very well off, good health, nothing to do but enjoy life.
And looking forward to marrying Roger Ackroyd. Don't forget to leave that out.
That's an item of fact only in your local gossip circle.
A fact's a fact. And there is such a thing as remorse, James, even if you're as wealthy as Mrs. Ferrars.
Remorse?
I have always been convinced she poisoned her husband, and I'm more than ever convinced of it now. If you'd arranged an inquest a year ago, as I suggested you should...
You're talking nonsense, Caroline.
Then you're absolutely satisfied it was an accident?
I'm satisfied this bacon is not going to get any warmer by itself, and it's time I went to the surgery to see my patient.
All right, James. You don't have to be grumpy about it. Oh, by the way, Mr. Ackroyd's butler, Parker, called.
What about?
Mr. Ackroyd wants to know if you'll dine with him this evening. He says he'd regard it as a great favor if you'd cancel any other engagement.
Of course I'll go, and don't worry, Caroline. I may tell you all about the dinner tomorrow.
Oh, then I'll give you something to tell Mr. Ackroyd tonight. Rafe Peyton is back.
Rafe Peyton?
Yes, and he's staying at the Dog and Whistle. I know he's taking particular pains to be sure that Mr. Ackroyd doesn't find out about it.
I wouldn't dream of telling him. Roger Ackroyd's relations with his stepson are his own affair. Believe me, Caroline, according to every interpretation except your own.
I can't help it if people tell me things.
In answer to questions.
Well, you'd better rush along to that precious surgery of yours. You've got 4 patients waiting.
How do you know?
Well, one can't help seeing through a window if one is looking through a window.
The distance from my house to Fernley Hall, Roger Ackroyd's home, is a little over 2 miles. I remember that evening as I walked that the subject of Caroline's latest piece of gossip kept returning to my mind. Rafe Peyton was in King's Abbot. Rafe Peyton, whom I'd known and liked since he was a child. Adopted by Ackroyd upon the death of his mother, he'd grown up to be a handsome but what our narrow little village regarded as a rather wild young man. There'd been many stormy scenes between his stepfather and himself before he finally left for London. According to Caroline, he was secretly engaged to Flora Ackroyd, Roger Ackroyd's niece, who with her mother was now living in Fernley Hall. According to Caroline, I say, and Caroline's information, I'm afraid, is always exact. However illegitimate her source may be. What's the trouble, Ackroyd? A bit under the weather?
Yes, Doctor. I've had a little of that pain after food lately. You must give me some more of those tablets of yours.
I thought as much, Ackroyd. I brought some up with me. In my bag in the hall. I'll get them.
No, don't trouble. Make certain that window's closed, will you, Shepard?
Of course. Well, that one's open.
I'll put the latch across, will you?
All right. I see what's really bothering you, Ackroyd.
The door's closed, isn't it?
Yes.
Shepard, nobody knows what I've gone through in the last 24 hours.
What's the trouble?
You're an old friend, Doctor. My oldest friend, perhaps. You attended Ashley Ferrars in his last illness, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Did it ever enter your mind that he might have been poisoned?
Well, frankly, Ackroyd, I don't think I should.
He was poisoned.
By whom?
His wife. She told me so herself yesterday.
Yesterday? You mean a few hours before she died, she told you?
Yes. Some weeks ago, I asked Mrs. Ferrars to marry me. She refused. Last week, I asked her again, and she consented. Yesterday, I called upon her. I noticed that she'd been very strange in her manner for some days. Now, without the least warning, she broke down completely. She told me everything. Her hatred of her swine of a husband, her growing love for me, and then, a year ago, the dreadful means she had taken to free herself. It was poison, Shepard. Murder in cold blood.
Murder? Are you sure, Ackroyd?
That wasn't all. It seems there's one person who's known all along what she did, who's been blackmailing her for huge sums. It was the strain of that drove her nearly mad.
Who's the man?
She wouldn't tell me his name.
Have you any suspicion?
I don't dare have a suspicion. Something she said made me think that the person in question might actually be a member of my household. But that can't be so. I won't let it be so. I must have misunderstood her.
What'd you say to her?
What could I say? She made me that promise to do nothing for 24 hours, and she refused to give me the name of the scoundrel who'd been blackmailing her. I never dreamt she'd kill herself. Shepard, will you hand me that letter on the table there, in the blue envelope?
This one?
Thanks. It's from her. It arrived during dinner. She must have written it just before she...
Do you think she wrote you the little bit she didn't tell you, is that it? Name of the man?
Yes, I think so. I've got to open it, and yet I'm afraid. What's that?
What?
I thought the latch of the door gave a bit.
Yes? I'll see if there's anyone there. No one.
Nerves, I expect. Are you sure you shut the window?
Yes, it's closed.
Well, I'll read it. If I read it to you, it won't seem so bad. I won't be facing it alone, no matter what the name. My dear, my very dear Roger, a life calls for a life. I see that. I saw it in your face this afternoon, so I'm taking the only road open to me. I leave to you the punishment of the person who made my life a hell on earth for the last year. I would not tell you the name this afternoon, but I propose to write it to you now, dear Roger, now that I have nothing more to fear. Will you forgive me, Shepard, but I see I must read this alone. It was meant for my eyes and my eyes alone.
Do you think that's wise, Roger?
I'd rather wait.
Well, if you insist on not letting me help you.
If you must put it that way, yes, my dear friend, I do insist. I'm sorry.
I left Fernley Hall at 9:15. From Fernley Hall to my house, it takes, as a rule, about 3/4 of an hour. That night there was a moon shining, and I did it in less. From the road, I noticed the lights blazing in our parlor. Caroline was entertaining. Through the window, I caught sight of an egg-shaped head partially covered with suspiciously black hair, 2 immense mustaches, and a pair of watchful eyes.
James, come in. You're just in time for hot milk and crackers.
Oh, thank you, Caroline. Oh, excuse me, I'm
This
sorry.
is my brother, Dr. Shepherd.
I am enchanted.
James, this is Mr. Hercule Poirot.
How do you do, sir?
Mr. Poirot is our new neighbor.
If I may be permitted one slight correction, my name is Hercule Poirot. Your good sister proceeds on the familiar English assumption that we are not English, do not know how to pronounce our own silly names.
He's just making fun of me, James. He has a very dry wit. We've had quite an interesting conversation.
I question that it was two-sided.
And you know what Mr. Poirot told me? He's a policeman.
Pardon, mademoiselle. Not yet. I see. Do you appreciate Hercule Poirot? His true worth. The name Poirot, mademoiselle, is known today in every continent, every land, nay, in every city of the world. I am become the last word. I am as much a specialist as an Harley Street physician.
Well, that's what I said, didn't I? A detective.
Yeah, consulting detective.
That's what I said.
I'm afraid, Mr. Poirot, you find little to occupy a man of your talents in this village.
Mr. Poirot tells me what he's looking for just now is peace and quiet.
Precisely, mademoiselle. That and the correct soil, which you have in so great abundance here in King's Abbot for the cultivation of cucumbers.
Oh, I'll answer it. It's probably Mrs. Bates and her rheumatism.
Never mind, Caroline. I'll take it.
Oh, all right.
Hello. Hello. What? What's that? Certainly, of course. Of course I will at once.
What is it?
It's Parker, the butler, calling from Fernley. Just found Roger Ackroyd. Murdered.
Why, Dr. Shepherd.
What is he, Parker?
I beg your pardon, sir.
Mr. Ackroyd, don't stand there staring at me. Have you notified the police?
The police,
What's the matter with you, Parker? You called me to tell me your master's been murdered.
The master murdered?
Didn't you telephone me not 5 minutes ago and tell me Mr. Ackroyd had been found murdered?
Me? Oh, no, sir.
My English is not of the best, Dr. Shepard, but there seems to be a peculiar misapprehension.
Why, Dr. Shepard, I
I'll
never...
give you the exact words I heard just now on the phone. This is Parker, the butler at Furness speaking. Will you please come at once, sir? Mr. Ackroyd has been murdered.
But, Doctor, I...
Where is Mr. Ackroyd, Parker?
Why, he's in the study,
If you don't mind waiting down here a moment, Monsieur Poirot, I won't be a minute.
This way, sir.
But of course, of course.
I'd rather not intrude on him, sir, if you don't mind.
Well, I will then. Door's locked.
Well, Mr. Ackroyd must have locked
And now
himself
our
in
Campbell
and possibly
Playhouse
just got
presentation
lost.
of the murder of Roger Ackroyd with our guest of the evening, Edna May Oliver.
Yes, Parker.
And ladies and gentlemen,
I'm
before we
afraid it's
begin,
doing
I
rather
think
we
you'd
are.
like to know that we have with us in the studio tonight as a surprise
Here we
visitor
go together now.
none other than the celebrated Belgian detective, Mr. Hercule Poirot.
Ladies and gentlemen, I bid you good evening.
If we had time, which we have not, I'm sure nothing would please us more than to hear from Mr. Poirot. Unfortunately,
Why, unfortunately, when we have here a microphone...
You don't understand.
I understand only that since my arrival in your country some weeks ago, I observed that there circulates an impression of my person which I must now publicly refute. I trust that the embarrassment of my presence here tonight in Mr. Wells' studio will ensure from him an honest and lifelike portrait.
Who are you?
It has been said that I am a little man. A regard for yourself that this is not so. I have 5 feet 2 inches of height.
How long should you
My
say
head
he's
is
been dead?
perhaps egg-shaped, and I carry it perhaps a little to one side.
You had to
and
break
left,
down the
but
door,
my
eh?
eyes shine green
What about
when
the-
I am excited.
The English people, they have a mania for the fresh air. The big air is all very well outside where it belongs. Why admit it to the house?
Hey,
and Mr. Wells
who are you?
tribute to Hercule.
How did you get in here?
I will be
You call yourself unfortunate man an inspector of police when you say to me, who am
If you will
I?
show me where I am.
Hercule Poirot, master
this is Mr.
detective,
Poirot,
possessed of the
How do you
finest
do?
brain in Oliver you have known in every company I am sure I land, nay, in every city.
Not in my part of the world, you ain't. I never heard
Ladies and
of it.
gentlemen, our Campbell Playhouse presentation of the murder of Roger Ackroyd.
Well, all right, then. You can stay. But this is my case, and don't you forget it. Now, when was Mr. Ackroyd last seen alive?
Well, let me to start with give you some idea of the little village of King's Abbot, which I have so many years been the leading, I must admit, also the only physician and surgeon.
Who to, Mr. Raymond?
My name, by the way, is Shepherd, James Shepherd.
But I know
We have a large railway
You didn't
station,
hear any
small
of the
post
conversation,
office,
did
2
you,
rival
Raymond?
general stores,
did
very
catch
few
the fragment
able-bodied
of it.
men, a staggering number of
Did
unmarried
travel
ladies,
out?
none of whom
Remember,
are getting
please,
younger,
the words
and an
exactly.
amazing
It's
number of
very
retired
important.
military
Sure that I
officers,
can.
all of
The
whom are
words
getting older.
exact.
Wait a minute.
In fact, the
Mr.
only
Poirot,
newcomer for
who's
many months
conducting
is
this
next
case?
door
You
to
or
me,
me?
concerning whom little is known,
Now
despite
then,
the earnest
Raymond,
and tireless
what was these
investigations
words
carried
you
on
heard Mr.
in
Ackroyd
respect to
say
him by
at
my
9:30?
sister Caroline. Caroline and her little
Come
group
on.
of earnest ferrets, or
Let's
maiden
surrender
ladies
the
like
exact
herself,
words
have been
were-
forced to content themselves with the simple
cause of my
fact of his
perseverance
nationality,
frequent of
which
late,
is
I find
alien,
it
of his name, which is Poirot, the obvious fact that he
Thank
flutters
you,
around his
Mr.
garden all day
Raymond.
growing
Very
cucumbers,
much.
and the
I
suspicion,
beg
based
pardon.
chiefly on
Well, what
malicious
is it,
deductions,
Parker?
he's retired hairdresser.
Just remembered.
Let's see
This
now. The main house,
flower
very important
saw
in
Mr.
Abbot, is
Ackroyd
Fernley
later
Hall, owned by
in
Roger
life.
Ackroyd, who's always looked more like a country squire than any country squire could really look, but who's
She was just
actually
closing
an
the study
immensely
door.
wealthy manufacturer of wagon
No,
wheels,
sir.
nearly 50 years
She'd
of age,
already
rubric of the
closed
face
the
and
door when
genial
I
of
saw
manner,
her.
and general the
She told
life
me
and
Mr.
soul
Ackroyd
of our,
was not
this
to be
weak,
disturbed again.
peaceful village.
Where's Miss Flora?
The other house, very important,
Shall I ask
Mr.
you to
Mrs.
come down?
Ferrars, by her
No,
late
no.
husband.
One moment, if I
Mrs.
might
Ferrars
be so
died on the night of
humble,
the 16th
Monsieur
September, a little less than a
Could
week
I
ago.
ask our friend Parker for a
Sent over
little information?
Well, what was it?
Thank you for your so
None
gracious
done. She's
permission,
been dead some
Inspector. Tell me,
hours.
Parker.
Returned to my home as soon as I
Is this
decently
room
could, looking forward
exactly
happily
as
to
it
warm
was
breakfast
when you
dining,
entered it
and
with
rather
Dr. Shepherd?
unhappily to the
Well,
certainty
to
of
tell you
a
the
relentless
truth,
cross-examination
I
by
felt
my sister
myself
Caroline.
that this
Is
chair
that you,
was
James?
drawn out
What
of
on
the-
earth are you doing out there in the hall?
Just
Can I
hanging up
apologize
my
for
overcoat,
join
my
the
dear.
window?
That's right.
Ferrars died in her sleep,
Yes,
didn't
no
she?
one would want to
Bacon
sit
is
in a
cold.
chair in
I've
such a
got dawn
position.
securing
What are you talking
information
about?
that
When a
the
man
warming
wants
of
to
bacon
sit, he
is ready.
sits,
I
don't
suppose
he?
you're going
Who
to tell us
pushed
that
it
of
back in
heart
place,
And he
I
told
wonder?
me.
Did you,
The
Parker?
milkman
No,
told
sir,
her.
no, sir.
He had it
I
from
was too
Ferrars'
upset
cook.
at seeing the
Since
master.
you're bound to hear sooner or later, Caroline, from the greengrocer
It's
or the
completely
postman, I might as well tell you
unimportant.
myself. She died of an
That's
overdose
why
of sleeping medicine. She hadn't been sleeping well lately.
Nonsense. She took it on purpose.
Well, why on earth should Mrs. Ferrars wish to commit suicide? A widow, still fairly young, very well off, good health, nothing to do but enjoy life.
And looking forward to marrying Roger Ackroyd. Don't forget to do that.
That's an item of fact only in your local gossip circle.
A fact, a fact. Don't worry about me. There is such a thing as remorse, James. Cucumber, you're as wealthy as Mrs. Ferrars.
Remorse?
I have always been convinced she poisoned her husband. And I'm more than ever convinced of it now. If you'd arranged an inquest a year ago, as I suggested, you should.
You're talking nonsense, Caroline.
You're absolutely satisfied for an hour or two.
I'm satisfied this bacon is not going to get any warmer by itself. And it's time I went to the surgery to see my patient.
Oh, Roger, I didn't know. Have to be grumpy about it. I don't think I would. Oh, by the way, well, Mr. Ackroyd's butler, Parker, called.
What about?
Mr. Ackroyd wants to know if you'll dine with him this evening. He says he'd regard it as a great favor if you'll cancel any other engagement.
Did you explain it to him, Caroline? Don't worry, Caroline. I may tell you all about the dinner tomorrow.
I'll give you something to tell Mr. Ackroyd tonight.
Isn't the bacon needn't always be cold, I dare say, but it is, and so am I. But not cold, but facetious.
I know he's taking particular pains to be sure that Mr. Ackroyd doesn't find out about it.
I wouldn't dream of telling him. Roger Ackroyd's relations with his stepson is
particularly admires my wonderful
Caroline, according to every interpretation except your own.
I can't help it if people tell me things.
In answer to questions.
Well, you'd better rush along to that precious surgery of yours. You've got 4 patients waiting.
How do you know?
Well, one can't help seeing through a window.
Morning, good shepherd.
One is
Good
looking
morning.
through. Oh,
The beautiful morning is if not seen. How is this very beautiful? I give it altogether, my good shepherd. I have a wonderful morning. Everywhere I
The
learn
distance from my house to Fernley Hall, Roger Ackroyd's home, is a little over 2 miles.
Sales of Hercule.
I remember that evening as I walked, the subject of Caroline's latest piece of gossip kept returning to my mind. Rafe Peyton
so
and King's
Rafe Peyton this morning. I
Rafe
go to
Peyton,
the
who I'd known
hotel.
and liked since he was a
child.
Thank you, Miss Caroline.
Adopted by Ackroyd
I
from the
will
death
talk
of his
myself
mother, he'd
to
grown
Rafe
up to be a
Peyton, and
handsome
they
but
tell
what
me
our
at the
narrow little
dog
village
and
regarded as a rather wild young
was
man.
here last night.
Many
Another
stormy
gentleman
scenes
asked me
between
for
his
Mr.
stepfather and himself
Why,
before he finally left for London.
certainly think you
According
might
to Caroline, he was secretly engaged to Flora Ackroyd, Roger Ackroyd's niece. Who with her mother was now living in Fernley Hall.
myself, the members of your intelligence service.
According to Caroline,
I say.
Caroline's information, I'm afraid.
Rafe
is
Peyton left the
exact.
dog and was at 9 o'clock last night. I never came back.
Well, what on earth do you think happened to him?
Rafe Peyton has a right to come and go as he pleases.
Ackroyd, a bit under the weather?
Yes, Doctor, I've had a little of that pain up in food
Leaving
lately.
his luggage
Must you miss more of those tablets of yours?
By the way, my good shepherd,
My
telephone call.
No, no
you
trouble.
mean when...
Make certain that window's closed when you shut
That
it
is
up.
the one. Tell me, do you think it is
I'll put the letter
possible
across
that
with it.
someone could have telephoned you and
really bothering you,
imitated
Ackroyd.
Parker's
Yes.
voice sufficiently to
The door's
deceive
closed,
you?
isn't it?
Well, he said he was Parker. James really doesn't know Parker's
Nobody
voice.
knows what
well,
I'm
enough.
going
Of course, of course. But the telephone call was traced this morning by my friend Inspector Hempstead.
You
It
attended
didn't come
Ashley
from
Ferris
Fernley
and
Hall
Dusty
at all.
Road.
It was put through to
Evidently
you
your
at
mind.
9:50 last
He
night
might have been poisoned.
from a public call office at
frankly,
King's
I
Abbot
don't
Station,
think I should.
and
He
at
was
23 the night mail is for Liverpool.
His wife.
It is the inspector's opinion that the murderer may have left King's Abbot
You mean
on
a
that
few
very
hours before she
train.
died, she told me?
Then you do believe that Rafe Peyton...
Some weeks
I
ago, I asked
believe
Mrs.
nothing,
Ferris to marry.
mademoiselle,
Refused.
until it is proved.
Last week I asked her again, and she consented.
I
Yesterday I called
think,
upon her. I noticed
Caroline,
that
that
she was very strange in her manner for
Roger
some days.
Ackroyd was
Now,
murdered.
without the least warning, she broke down
Outside of
completely.
that, I
Totally
think
everything.
that I will have
Hatred
to
of her
think
swine of a
a
husband,
deal more.
a growing love for me, and then, a year ago, the first woman she had taken to free herself.
Oh, it's an outrage. That's what it is.
Murder in
A
cold
little
blood.
man, not even an
Sure,
Englishman.
that wasn't
Foreigner
all.
with
It
moustaches.
seems there's one
Comes
person
to
who's
home,
known
a
all
British
along that she
home,
did.
a house of
who's
mourning,
been
unpleasant,
blackmailing her
unwelcome.
huge
Mother,
son.
do be quiet.
It
No,
was
I will
strange
not.
at the Globe
Comes
again.
in here, into my
Who's the
own
man?
brother-in-law's
You wouldn't tell
house.
me his name.
Questions us like a lot
Have you
of
any
criminals.
suspicion?
I don't
Besmirches our
dare.
kiss and kin.
Something she
Mr.
said
Poirot, you
made me
must
think the
excuse my
person in
mother. My
question
uncle's death
might
was a
actually
terrible
be
shock.
a
I
member of my household.
understand, mademoiselle.
But that can't be
very
so.
little
I
that
won't let it be so.
Poirot does not understand.
Honestly,
What'd you say to her?
Poirot, you're on the wrong track.
She made me
Rafe Peyton has
promise
nothing to do with this crime.
nothing but 24 hours.
The mere fact that he was
She
hard
refused
pressed
to
for
give
money.
her the
Was
money
he
to
hard
Carl,
pressed
who'd
for
been
money,
blackmailed.
Mr. Raymond?
Raymond, now you made it seem as though...
Miss Ackroyd, I'm merely telling the truth. Yes, he was
Good.
hard pressed.
Will you hand me
He's
that
always
letter
trying to step
on the
father
table
for
there?
money.
But,
Please,
Mrs. Poirot,
madam, had he
There.
done so of late, Mr.
From her.
Raymond? During the last
It
week, for
arrived during
example.
dinner.
Mr. Ackroyd didn't
She
mention
must
such
have
a fact to
written
me.
it just before she...
Of course, Mr. Peyton will
You
never
think
again have to
She
apply
wrote
to
you a little
anyone
bit
for
she
money.
didn't
mean
tell you,
that,
did he? Name of the man.
Mr. Ackroyd's will.
Exactly. After paying
I've
certain
got to
legacies
admit,
to the
yes,
Queen,
I-
servants,
Great.
charities, and so on.
Aha,
Okay.
including yourself, Mr. Raymond.
Mr. Ackroyd was
the
good
door
enough to
gave it.
remember me to the extent of 1,000
See if there's anyone there.
It's not surprising. Go on, please.
Well,
Nerves,
Miss Flora Ackroyd inherits £20,000 outright.
Yes,
The residue, including this property and an
I'll
outstanding
read
control
it.
in the business.
If I read it to you, it
You've been
seems so bad.
familiar with this will for some time past, Mr. Raymond.
No
Roger
matter
Ackroyd's
what the
company
name.
secretary.
Of course. And Mr. Ackroyd
Yeah.
possessed a very large fortune
What do you
indeed,
do,
did he not?
Fortune that would
A
have been
life
regarded as
called
large
for
even in
life.
less tax-ridden times.
Then the
I
immediate
search my
inheritance
face
of such
this
a large
afternoon.
sum would have eased very
I'm taking
considerably
the
the
only
present
real-
difficulties of Mr.
I
Abbot.
leave
Mr.
to
Poirot,
you
you
the
don't-
punishment
Is that
of
so,
the
Mr.
person
Raymond?
who
Yes,
made
that's
my
so.
life
You
a hell on
awful
earth
little man,
for the
talking
last
that
year.
way, when you know how Flora feels about
I would
Roger's
not tell you
death.
the name.
The idea that you suspect him of killing his
write
Him no more than any other, madame.
You know what I think?
Now that I have
I
nothing
think
more to
Roger's
fear.
death was an accident. Roger was so
Will
fond
you
of
forgive me,
handling
Shepard, but I
curios.
see I must
His
read
hand
it
must
alone.
have
It
slipped or
was
something.
meant for my eyes.
He's really a
my
very
eyes
strange
alone.
man.
Do you think
Would
that's
you
wise,
believe it?
Roger?
He never
I'd
gave
rather
Flora
wait.
and me an allowance. His own
Yes, yes,
family.
just on
Of
that
course,
doesn't
we didn't
help.
have a penny of
If you
our
must
own.
put it that way.
Why, this very
If you need
moment...
any ready money, Mrs. Ackroyd,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Ackroyd cashed a check for
I do.
£100 yesterday for wages and other expenses due today. The money was never spent.
And where, if you please, is this
He
money?
always kept his cash in the bank.
I suggest that we see if the money is there.
Why, Mr. Poirot, surely.
Am I to understand you
I left
miserable
Burnley Hall
little
at quarter
foreigner
to
that you're
nine.
intimating
Since
I
now?
merely
Since
intimate,
about
ladies
three-quarters
and
of an hour.
gentlemen, that
And out
we
of the
see
moon
if the
shining, and
money
I
is
sit
still
and
there.
left. On the road, I noticed the lights blazing in our parlor.
Ladies
Caroline's
and gentlemen, there are
entertainment,
here
even though
only
I caught sight
60
of an
pounds.
eight-foot
That's
head
impossible.
partially covered with
60.
suspiciously black hair, two immense mustaches, and a
man's
pair of
right.
watchful eyes.
It is 60.
This is terrible.
Come in.
Dr. Shepherd.
You're just in
Poirot.
time for hot milk.
I hope nobody believes
One must believe there are 60 pounds
Blackmailer.
where they were. I am enchanted. However, I'm
Dave?
sure no one would
Mr.
suggest that you, Mr.
Poirot.
Raymond, or you, Mrs.
Poirot is our
Ackroyd,
new neighbor.
who alone
may be
you have the
permitted
money.
to-
Poirot, I could talk
Correction.
just
My
one
name is
moment.
Hercule Poirot.
I
Your
took
good
the money.
sister proceeds
I'm
on a
a thief.
familiar English
I'm a
assumption
common
that we
vulgar
are not
thief.
English, do
No,
not know
no.
how to pronounce
I'm
our
glad
own
that
silly
it's come out.
names. I am
He's
glad
just
also,
making
Miss
fun of me,
Flora.
James. He has a very
You are?
dry wit.
Yes, because now
has
we
quite an
comprehend
interesting
why
conversation.
Parker thought he saw you coming out of your
Well,
uncle's
that's
room
what
at a quarter
Poirot
of
told me.
He
10.
did see her coming out of the door. He said
No, that's
pardon,
just what he did
mademoiselle.
not
Not yet.
saw
I
Miss
see you
Flora outside
appreciate
the door with a
Hercule
random
Poirot.
handle.
True
He did not
words.
see
The
Miss
name
Flora come
Poirot,
out for a
mademoiselle,
good
is
reason.
known today in every
Miss Flora
continent,
was
every
never
land,
in
nay,
the
in
study.
every
Well,
city
where
of the
could you
world.
be?
Perhaps
I
on
am
this
become
day,
the most
those
the last
stairs only lead
word.
to
I am as
tobacco
much as
and
precisely than our
When you
least
knew I took
position.
the
Well, that's what I said, didn't I?
I knew nothing,
Detective.
but I consulting detective.
That's what I
As
said.
even now, I
Mr.
suspect
Poirot, you
that
find
this
it
money you
occupy
have
men of your
taken, you
talents,
did not
Mr.
take
Phillips.
it for yourself.
Poirot
I took it
tells
for
me what
myself.
he's looking for just now.
You can take
is
what's
peace
left
and
and
quiet.
Precisely, mademoiselle.
assure
That
you,
and the
Mr.
correct
Ackroyd,
soil, which you have in so great abundance
What
here
do you
in
want,
King's
please?
Abbot for the cultivation of
Why
cucumbers.
did you not tell me sooner?
I'll answer it.
Me,
Probably Mrs. Bates and her room.
Queen
Never
Anne
mind,
will
Caroline,
know
I'll take it.
everything.
Oh, all right.
Why do not all of
Hello.
you tell me the truth?
Just because Flora made a little mistake, that's no
Silence,
reason
silence, madame.
What's that?
Ladies and gentlemen,
Certainly, of course.
I am amazed.
Once I will at once.
My powers might not be what they were.
It's Parker, the
In
butler.
all
calling from Burnley.
probability, this is the last case I shall
Just
ever
found Roger
investigate.
Ackroyd. Murdered.
But Hercule Poirot. And I shall know in spite of you all.
What do you mean, in spite of
beg
us
your
all?
pardon,
Just that.
Mr. Ackroyd, don't stand there staring at me. Have you notified the
Every
police?
one of you in this room is
What's the matter with you, Parker? You called me to tell me your master's been murdered.
Maybe something
Didn't you telephone me not 5 minutes ago and tell me Mr. Ackroyd had been found murdered?
Me? Oh, no,
sir.
English is not of the best, Dr. Shepard, but there seems to be a peculiar misapprehension.
Why, Dr. Shepard,
I
I
I'll
never...
give you the exact words I heard just now on the
Miss
phone. This is
Flora.
Parker, the butler at Furnace
My
speaking. Will you
good
please come at
Shepard,
once,
Mrs.
sir? Mr. Ackroyd has been
Parker,
murdered.
Mr.
Doctor, I...
Where is Mr. Ackroyd, Parker?
Will no one.
If you don't mind waiting down here a moment, Monsieur Poirot, I won't be a minute.
This way, sir.
But of course. It is a pity.
I'd rather not intrude on him, sir, if you don't mind.
Well, I will then. Door's locked.
Mr. Ackroyd must have locked himself in and possibly just dropped off to sleep, sir.
Ackroyd!
You are listening to Orson Welles in the Campbell Playhouse presentation of The Murder of Roger
Break the
Ackroyd
door in, or rather
with
we
Edna
are.
May Oliver.
I'll
Shepard,
take the responsibility.
you say so,
All
sir.
right, here we go. Together now. Headed sideways.
This is the Columbia Broadcasting
The death was
System.
instantaneous. As they bothered to move, beyond making any certain, if I can think, I was still about it in the wind. You didn't touch the dagger with your Dr. Inspector?
No, good. Well, we'll want that for fingerprints.
Ackroyd was quite a collector. There are his silver cases over against the wall. Eh?
This is Ernest Chappell, ladies and gentlemen, welcoming you back to the Campbell Playhouse.
And Mr. Ackroyd's private
In a moment, we shall resume our presentation of the murder of Roger Ackroyd.
Now,
Meantime,
Doctor,
I'd
how
like
long
to
should
call
you
your
say
attention
he's
to
been
this
dead?
interesting
Half
fact.
an hour at least, perhaps longer.
Authorities tell us the
You have
young
to break
people
down
of
the door,
today
eh?
are healthier than the
Well,
youth of
then,
any previous
The English
generation.
people, they have a
And they say
mania
that a
for
big
the
contributing
fresh air.
cause
The
is the
big
broader
air is all
use
very well
of the right
outside where
kind
it
of food.
belongs. Why admit it to the
Take
house?
soup, for example.
Who are you?
Women have always realized
How
the
did you get
value
in
of
here?
good soup
You
in the
call
weekly diet.
yourself,
But it
unfortunate
took a
man, an
long time
inspector
to
of
make it.
police, and you say to me, who
Then
am
came
I?
Campbell soup.
Hercule Poirot,
women, one after
master
another, tried
detective,
them.
possessed of
They
the
compared
finest
them for
brain in
wholesomeness
Europe,
and
known
nourishment
in every
with their own
continent, in every
homemade
land,
soup.
nay, in every city.
They thought how
in my
much
part of
their
the world you
families
ain't. I
enjoyed
never
the
heard of
fine
you.
flavor of these soups of Campbell's. And because women no longer had to find time to make
All
it,
right, then.
soup
can
began
stay.
to come
But
to the
this is my
table
case, and don't you
more
forget
and
it.
more frequently.
Now then.
Today,
When was
soup
Mr.
figures
Ackroyd
more
last seen
importantly
alive?
than ever before in the preparation of sensible, nourishing family meals.
Mr. Ackroyd was certainly alive at 9:30.
And now Orson Welles continues our presentation of the murder of Roger Ackroyd
I don't know.
with
I
Edna
just
May
said it
Oliver.
was. But I know it was 9:30.
You didn't hear any of their conversation, did you, Mr. Newman?
I did catch a fragment of it. It did strike me as a trifle odd.
Remember, please, the words exact. It is very important.
I'm not sure that I can.
The words exact.
Wait
I'm
a
a
minute,
village
Mr.
surgeon,
Parrott.
and
Who's
Hercule
conducting
Poirot
this
is a
case? You or me?
distinguished Belgian detective.
Now then,
So it was
Mr.
scarcely
Raymond.
for me to
What
tell
was
him I
these
thought he was
words you heard
wasting his
Mr.
time.
Ackroyd say at 9:30?
Certainly not for me to tell him that he was getting
Well,
on my nerves.
come on.
Not that I didn't
swear on the
admire
oath the
his
exact
extraordinary
words were-
clearness and insight.
The calls on my
Poirot's right,
purse have been so
about the
frequent
dagger.
that I find it impossible.
Police investigation confirmed his suspicion
Thank
that the
you,
fingerprints
Mr.
on the handle of the dagger were those of Roger Ackroyd, the murdered man.
Well, what is it, Parker?
Though the position of the
just
dagger
remembered.
definitely precluded
This
suicide.
Flora saw Mr. Ackroyd later.
Poirot established
About
that it had
quarter
not
to
been
10.
Parker,
She was
the
just
butler,
coming out of
who
this
summoned me on
You
the
mean
phone that night.
She was just closing
What
the
had
study
become
door?
the house of death.
No, sir. She'd
And
already
again, it was
closed the door
Hercule
when I saw
Poirot who
her.
made it indubitably clear that nobody had seen Roger Ackroyd alive after
Where's Miss
9:30, at which
Upstairs in
time
the room.
Raymond the secretary had
Shall I
heard
ask her to come down?
Ackroyd's
No,
voice in
I'll
the
go.
study.
One moment, if I might be
In
so
spite of all this,
humble,
it seems to me that Hercule
Mr.
Poirot is
Inspector.
making
Could I ask our
little
friend
real
Parker
progress
for
in
little
solving the mystery of
information?
Roger Ackroyd's death.
Thank you for your so gracious permission,
Furthermore,
Inspector.
it
Tell me,
seems a
Parker.
curious thing for a detective of his
Is this room
self-proclaimed
exactly
standing
as
to be
it
spending
was
so
when
much
you
of
went
his
to the
precious
Dr.
time in
Shepherd?
idle chatter
Well,
with my
to tell you the
sister,
truth, sir,
Caroline.
I felt
I had a
myself
very interesting
that
chat,
this
Mr.
chair
Poirot,
was
James.
drawn out a little
He
more.
thinks me
It's been
very
puzzling.
The
interesting.
grandfather
So you
chair
told me.
between the door and the window.
Is it
That's
just
right.
a coincidence, Caroline, that on those
No one would
occasional
want to
mornings
sit in
when
a
the bacon
chair
is
in
both
such a
warm
position?
What are
and
you
crisp,
talking about? When a
it
man
would
wants
be
to
so
sit,
far
he
away
sits,
from me
don't
that
he?
I can't
Who
reach
pushed
it?
it back in
bacon,
place,
Mr.
I
Poirot.
wonder? Did
No
you,
such thing as
Parker?
too much
No,
bacon.
sir. No, sir.
Now, be the
I
judge
was
what's
too
good for me.
upset
I
at
rather
seeing the
fancy
master
that
of
at least is something I know best, Caroline.
Is it, sir?
It is
You know so
completely
many things,
unimportant.
James. You're
That's
so
why it is so
complicit.
interesting.
That's why it's difficult to talk to you. That's why you get the idea that people are trying to pump you.
Some more bacon, please.
Poirot says I'd make
You're
an
very late for
excellent
breakfast,
James.
Did it? Quite late, Caroline. I'm afraid I forgot your natural
We had a very
anxiety to
interesting
learn
chat.
details you're not supposed to know.
Well,
Poirot
lovely,
found it
James.
interesting.
Poirot said I was more valuable than anyone this morning. Dick told me a lot about his life, too. About a man said you
Good. Perhaps you have some information
You
for
know
me,
that Prince
Caroline.
Paul of Mauritania, the one who just married his daughter? Well,
I do not know her. You do not know her, and I do not care to hear about her or about his mad nephew either. I haven't seen our friend since he went to bed.
Well, I don't
you any
much
questions,
like telling you
Caroline?
either. No questions. I didn't know the chatting himself.
More bacon, please.
Well, he was worrying about the print of some shoes outside the window. Poirot didn't ask me. The rubber might have.
Whom do you suspect?
Shouldn't suspect anybody. I know. No what? Parker
Did you
was here
explain
on
it to
your
him,
Thursday
Caroline?
morning of the
Hasn't the
murder.
cook been of any help to you, or
Faces
the milkman, or the Ladies' Aid Society?
Sure,
or-
it always be suspicious.
Isn't the bacon needn't always be cold, I dare say, but it is, and so am I. But not cold, but facetious. Francis, he was stabbed in the neck. You know that as well as I do.
After death to make a false clue.
I examined the body, and I know what I'm talking about. That wound wasn't
particularly
inflicted after
admires
death.
my
It was the
wonderful
cause of death.
instinct into human nature.
And don't look so
Told me a
omniscient.
lot about the
Next you'll be
secret
telling me you know more about medicine than I do.
His.
Perhaps you think you could take over my practice.
Oh, don't be ridiculous. You know I
I'm sure
haven't
they
liked
are.
him. You think you're very intelligent.
Good morning, good gentlemen. Good morning. The beautiful morning, is it not? See, how is this very cucumber? Beautiful now, my friend.
That afternoon, Caroline had a
I give it
mahjong
you
party made
altogether,
up
my
of a
good
little
shepherd. I
group
have
of
a
village
wonderful morning.
gossipers,
Everywhere I
in
learn
whose
things
opinion
new and
I now learned Grace Peyton was mysteriously concealed somewhere in Cranchester, the only big town in the nearest.
Working.
Miss Caroline, she tells
Miss
me so
Gannett's
much
maid,
about
it
Ray
seems,
Peyton this morning. I go to the hotel. It's
while
what you
taking
call
a
it.
walk
Thank you, Miss Caroline. And I think I will talk myself to Ray Peyton. And they tell me at the Dog and Whistle that was here last night. Another gentleman asking for Mr. Peyton.
Why, James, I certainly
Caroline,
you might have
please,
known.
whenever
Caroline, I
possible,
thought someone ought to
getting
inform
the
us that
information
I'm
directly from headquarters.
The least one could do, since
A
no
little
one but
more
myself
red
remembers
for
your
shape, Mr.
intelligence.
Poirot.
Under no circumstances. I am already a man of a
Ray Peyton left the dog
great.
at 9 o'clock last night and never came back.
Well, what on earth do you think happened to
Ray
him?
Peyton has a right to come and go as he pleases.
There is no harm in any
Anyway, might even gone back to London.
There you are. Now, the Poirot.
I beg your pardon,
Oh, by
Caroline.
the way, my good chap, that
Oh,
telephone
so
call.
Oh, you mean the one
you
that
are.
came while
Thanks.
you were at the house with Mr.
That is the one. Tell me, do you think it is possible that someone could have telephoned you and imitated Parker's voice if you regarded as legal evidence in the courtroom, mademoiselle? Of course. But the telephone call was traced this morning by my friend, Inspector. You have a theory.
I don't have a
It
theory.
didn't come from Fanny
I
Hall
know.
at all.
James,
It was put through
don't
to you at
meddle about in
9:50
what you
last
don't
night
understand.
From a public call office at King's Abbot Station,
Yes,
and at 23 the
Point
night
number one.
mail is for Liverpool.
Mr. Ackroyd was heard
It
talking
is
to
the
someone
inspector's
after
opinion
after
that the
half past
murderer
nine.
may have left
Point
King's
number
Abbot
two.
on that very
At
train.
some time during the
then
evening,
you do believe
Ray
that Ray
Peyton must have come in
I
through the window
believe
with evidence
nothing,
by the
mademoiselle,
pricks of his shoes.
until it is proved.
Point number three. What do you think? Mr.
I
Ackroyd
think, Miss Caroline, that
was murdered
Roger
that evening.
Ackroyd was
Could have only
murdered.
admitted someone he knew.
Outside
Point
of
number
that,
four.
I
The person
think
was
that
Ackroyd
I
at
will have to
9:30
think
was
a deal
asking for
more.
money. You know, Ray Peyton was in great. Oh, and one other thing, Mr.
Oh,
Poirot.
it's an outrage.
I
That's
found
what
out
it is.
something
A
for you
little
today.
man, not even an
The
English.
boots
a
Ray
foreigner
Peyton was
with
wearing that night,
moustaches, comes
they
into
were
his
not
home,
brown.
a British home,
They
a
were
house
black.
of mourning, unsolicited,
You have found that out for me.
unwelcome,
Thank
mother,
you.
do be Flora, I
Thank
will
you. You
not.
are sure, mademoiselle, they were
In my
brown and
own
black?
brother-in-law's
Positive?
house.
Too bad.
Questioned us like a lot
Too
of criminals.
bad. If they were
Such
only
about
black,
kids.
I mean, if they were.
You mean... I understand, mademoiselle. It is very little that Ray Peyton is guilty. Does not or innocent, according to whether his boots are brown or black.
Really?
Peyton has nothing to do with
It
this
could
crime.
easily be.
The mere fact that he was
For
hard pressed
murder, there was
money.
witness cremation, so many more.
Raymond, now you made it seem as though...
Miss Ackroyd, I'm merely telling the truth.
Blackmail. Ray Peyton may have been the man
Was
who
hard pressed.
blackmailed Mrs. Ferrars.
He's always applying to
Reason?
his stepfather for
His
money.
general money
Please,
leader.
mademoiselle,
The second
had
motive.
he done so
The
of
certainty
late,
of a
Mr.
great
Raymond,
inheritance
during the last
from
week,
Mr.
for
Ackroyd's
example?
death.
Mr.
That
Ackroyd
third
didn't
motive,
make
Caroline?
much
Very
sense.
simple, very simple.
course,
Mr.
Peyton
Ackroyd's
will never
violent
again have to
disapproval
apply to anyone.
of Ray's
You mean that,
proposed marriage to Miss Flora.
Mr. Ackroyd
Well, after listening to you, Caroline, I'd say the
After
case
paying
is very
certain
black
legacies
against
and bequeaths, servants,
Haven't the case
charities,
changed?
so on.
I know.
Including yourself.
Mr. Ackroyd is good enough to remember me to the extent of £1,000.
It's not surprising. Go on, please.
Well,
Late that afternoon,
Miss Flora
Mr.
Ackroyd
Poirot
inherits
called on me to ask if I could
£20,000
arrange a little conference room at his
the
home
residue,
that night.
including this property and an outstanding
Those at the
control
present,
business,
Mrs.
goes to
Ackroyd,
Ray Peyton.
You've
Flora,
been familiar with this
Raymond
case
and
from
Parker.
past, Mr. Raymond.
Roger Ackroyd.
I think Caroline,
Of course.
who was present when he
Mr.
called,
Ackroyd
was
possessed a
given
very
10
large
years
fortune
of her life
indeed,
to have been added to the
Fortune would
list.
have been regarded as large even in less
For
taxable.
my part,
times.
I've been only too glad to yield up my place when those who in that particular evening gathered around the beaming countenance
present
of the Belgian
difficulties of
detective,
Mr. F. Peyton.
cucumber breeder.
you don't...
Is that so, Mr. Raymond? Yeah, I'm clearing my throat.
Awful little man, talking
That
way.
is an
When you know
accepted
how
signal
Flora
in this
feels about
country
Rob.
that a meeting is
The
about to
idea
begin.
that you suspect him of killing
Quiet.
him.
Him
no
more
reason
than
it.
any other, madame.
You
You
know
will
what
please
I
answer
think?
to your
I think
names.
Roger's death was an accident.
Raymond.
Roger was
Yes?
so fond of handling curios.
Parker.
His hand must have slipped or something.
Mrs. Ackroyd.
Yes, but I want to
strange.
think out
Yes,
the truth. Would you
will
believe
be
it?
sufficient.
He never gave Flora and me an allowance.
Miss
To no
Flora.
family.
Mr.
Of
Poirot,
course,
what's the
we didn't
meaning of
have
all
a penny of our
The
own.
list I have
the
just
very
read.
moment.
The list
Ready
of
money, Mr.
suspected
Ackroyd.
persons.
Mr. Ackroyd cashed a check.
Every
for
one of you
£1,000.
present had the
The wages and other
opportunity to
expenses
kill
today.
Mr. Ackroyd.
I won't
Money was
stand
never
for
And
this.
where
I don't.
you
Please,
will
it is
not
He always
go,
kept his cash in
madame.
his bedroom.
I suggest that we see if
Until
this
you
money
have
is
heard
safe.
what
I have to say.
Well, surely.
Am I to understand
I
you
clear
miserable
my throat
foreigner
again.
that you're intimating that
I merely
now
intimate,
I
ladies
come
and
at the
gentlemen, that we...
Until now, ladies and gentlemen, we have all been trying to answer to ourselves one principal question.
Ladies
was
and
he knew
gentlemen, there are here only
Ackroyd at
60
night?
pounds.
Oh, that's impossible.
Not
Let me see.
Dr. Shepherd, since I myself can prove that he was at home.
The
Not
man's
Miss
right.
Flora,
It is 60.
nor
Right.
Mrs. Ackroyd.
terrible.
No, Mr. Raymond,
Poirot.
with whose
I
actions
hope
on
nobody
that
believes
evening
me.
are well
believe
acquainted.
there are
Nor
60
Parker,
pounds
who
where
has
they were
furnished me with a
hundred.
satisfactory
However, I'm sure
alibi.
no one would suggest
Who
that
then?
you, Mr. Raymond, or
This
you,
is the
Mrs.
part of
Ackroyd,
Hercule
who
Poirot, the
alone knew
cleverest,
of the
the
money.
most
Poirot, I
audacious
suggest
question.
just one moment. Dora. I took
Was anyone with him?
Are you trying to make me
I'm
out
a
a liar,
common,
Mr.
vulgar
Poirot?
little thief.
I tell you, I distinctly
No,
heard
no.
voices. I
I'm
distinctly
glad that
heard the
it's
words
come
that Mr. Ackroyd was
I'm
speaking.
Mr. Raymond, the words that Mr.
You are?
Ackroyd
Yes,
says.
because now we
The
comprehend
calls
why Parker
on my
thought we
purse
saw
have
you
been so
coming out of
frequent
your
of late
uncle's
that
room
I
at
believe it is
10:15.
impossible
coming
for
out
me
the
to
door. He said
accede
No,
to
that's
your
just what he
request.
did not see. He saw Miss Flora outside the door with her
But
hand on
nothing
the
strike
handle.
you
He
as
did not
odd
see Miss
about
Flora
it.
come out of the
This
study for a good
diary,
reason.
for example.
Miss
No, he
Flora was
frequently
never
did
in the
that.
study.
Well, where else could she have
That
been?
is precisely what I
Well,
think
those
I
stairs only
have.
lead to Mr. Ackroyd's bedroom.
Would any man use such a phrase in talking to another,
I
huh?
knew nothing, but I
I
suspected
think not
much.
My friends, you have all forgotten
Even
one
now,
thing.
I suspect
The
that this
stranger
money
who called
you
at the house in the
taken, you did not
proceeding
take
weekend,
it
the
for
firm he
yourself.
represented. You remember, Mr. Raymond?
Dictaphone company.
A dictaphone, that's
I
what you
assure you,
said.
Mr. Ackroyd had promised to invest in a dictaphone, you remember.
one thing.
Me, I had the curiosity
Why
to
did you
inquire
not
of the
tell me
company in
sooner?
question. Their reply, Mr.
Me,
Raymond,
Hercule.
was that Mr. Ackroyd
Who
did
in the
purchase
end will
a
know
dictaphone from their representative.
Why do
Why
not
he
all of
concealed
you
the
tell me
matter
the
from you,
truth?
his
Just
confidential
perhaps Flora made a
secretary,
little
I do
mistake,
not
that's
know.
all.
Must admit, surprising.
madam.
Yet quite a childish
and
love of
gentlemen.
surprising people.
Oh, there's only
am
one man
amazed.
who could have done it.
You mean Rafe?
Mother. Oh,
My
let's
powers
face it,
might
if
not
he's
be
innocent,
what
he
they
should be able
were.
to prove it. If he isn't,
If only he'd come forward.
That is your advice, Mr. Raymond. That he should come forward.
Certainly.
But
You know where he
Poirot
is?
does not end
Me?
with a failure.
I
Ladies
know
and
everything.
gentlemen, I tell you, I mean
Remember
to
that.
know, and I shall
The
know
truth of
in
the
spite
telephone
of
call
you
of the
all.
footprints
How
on
do
the
you mean,
window
in spite of
sill
the
of the
truth?
hiding place of Rafe Peyton.
where is he?
Not very far
Every one of
away.
you
Where?
in this room is concealing something
Where?
from me. No.
It may be something
He's
trivial,
not
which is
Rochester.
supposed to have no
He
bearing
is
on the
here.
case. In the doorway of
Each
this
one
room.
of you has something to hide.
Flora, my darling.
I appeal to
Have
you.
I
Tell me
not
the
told
truth
you
now.
all at least 36
also.
times that it was useless
Miss
to
Flora.
conceal things from
My
Hercule
good
Poirot?
shepherd, Mrs. Ackroyd.
That
Parker,
always
Mr.
I
Frank.
discover the little secret.
Will
I
no
will.
one speak?
From Dr. Shepard's sister Caroline. Ladies and gentlemen, I learned that the doctor and Rafe Peyton, they are old friends. And Dr. Shepard knows that things look very black against his friend Peyton. He tells him the old story.
Yes, he did. He explained to me how suspicion was bound to fall on me, and I had no real alibi.
And with the best of intentions, people sometimes make errors.
You are listening
That's
to
why
Orson Welles
Dr.
and the
Shepard
Campbell Playhouse
consented to do what he
presentation of the
could
Murder of Roger
to help
Ackroyd
Mr. Peyton. He was
with Edna
successful
May
in
Oliver.
hiding him from the police.
Where? In his own house?
No, indeed, Mr. Raymond. Ask yourself the question that I asked wildly. If the good doctor is concealing the young man, what place would he choose? It must necessarily be somewhere near at hand.
This is the
Is it a
Columbia
Manchester
Broadcasting
hotel? No. Lodgings? Even more emphatically, no. Where then? I have it. A nursing home. I make inquiries. Yes, at one of the patients was brought there by the doctor himself early on Saturday morning. That patient, I had no difficulty in identifying him as Ray Peyton. He arrived at my house yesterday, and now, ladies and gentlemen,
This is
we
Ernest
come to
Chappell,
the
ladies and
point of this
gentlemen,
evening's
welcoming you
meeting.
back to the Campbell
Ray
Playhouse.
Peyton says
In a
he
moment,
is
we shall
innocent
resume
of
our
the killing of
presentation
Roger
of the murder of
Ackroyd.
I
Roger
am.
Ackroyd.
I swear by
Meantime,
heaven
I'd like
I
to
am.
call your
Mr.
attention to this interesting fact.
You have
Authorities
just
tell
heard
us
Mr.
the young
Peyton
people of
declare
today are
he is
healthier than the youth of any
Yet
previous
he has three
generation.
motives for the murder
And they
and no
say that a big
alibi.
contributing
Well, I
cause
certainly
is
don't
the
see how you
broader
can
use
sit there.
I
of the
am
right kind of
possessing the
food.
floor, Mrs. Ackroyd.
Take soup, for example.
Listen
Women have always
carefully,
realized
everybody.
the value of good soup in
To
the weekly
save
diet.
Mr. Peyton,
But it took
the
a long
real
time to
criminal
make it.
must confess.
Then came
I
Campbell
you
soup,
speak to you.
and women one after another
Hercule
tried them.
Poirot.
They compared them
I
for
know
wholesomeness
that the
and
murder
nourishment
of Mr.
with their own
Ackroyd is in
homemade
this room
soup.
now, at this table.
They saw how
Tonight.
much their families enjoyed the fine flavor of these
Now,
soups
in the
at
morning, the
Campbell's.
truth goes to the police.
And because women no longer had to find
Yes.
time to make it, soup began
At
to
the
come
moment,
to the
I
table
know.
more and
I
more
know.
frequently. Today,
For the
soup
murder
figures
of
more
Roger
importantly than
Ackroyd,
ever before in the preparation
There
of
is only
sensible,
one way out.
nourishing family meals.
And that way does not lead to freedom.
And now Orson Welles continues our presentation of the murder of Roger Ackroyd
I speak.
with Edna May Oliver.
This is a matter of life and death. And I, Hercule Poirot, am not joking. Good night.
I am a village surgeon, and Hercule Poirot is a distinguished bell-tolling expert. It would scarcely easy for me to tell him I thought he was wasting his time.
James? What are you doing out there in the hall?
Getting on
Am I overcalled, my dear?
Well, aren't you coming in to chat?
I'm very tired, Caroline.
At least you can tell me what happened last night.
Mr. Poirot told us all about his little grey cell.
Police investigation confirmed his
does he think
suspicion that the
race
fingerprints on
No.
the handle of the dagger were those of
Well,
Roger Ackroyd, the
it's
murdered
straight,
man.
You can go over and tell him so in the morning.
The position of the dagger
Good night,
definitely
Caroline.
precluded suicide. Miss Poirot established that it had not been Parker, the butler, who summoned me on the phone that night to what had become a house of death.
I'm very tired.
And again, it was Hercule Poirot who made it indubitably clear that nobody had seen Roger Ackroyd alive after 9:30, at which time Raymond, the secretary, had heard Ackroyd's voice. As I think back, I'm not quite certain why I urged Ackroyd to read that letter before Hercule Poirot was making... Perhaps I progress in realizing the mystery of Roger Ackroyd's death. Like that, I'd best chance of getting him not to read it. Curious thing for a detective of his self-proclaimed standing to be spending so much of his precious time in idle chatter with my sister.
He never once suspected me as the blackmailer of Mrs. Ferrars.
Mr. Poirot, James.
The dagger was an afterthought.
Very intelligent.
So you told me. Weapon of my own.
just a coincidence,
Caroline, that on the occasional mornings when the bacon is both warm and crisp, a weapon that couldn't be traced. It would be so far away from me that I can't reach it.
Too
So I
much
must
bacon
have meant to
is good
murder
for
him
you.
all along.
No such thing as too much
As
bacon.
soon as I'd heard of
Now,
Mrs.
be the
Ferrars'
judge what's
death,
good
I
for me.
felt
I rather
convinced
fancy that at least is
stolen
something I know
everything
best,
before she
Caroline.
died.
You know so many things,
So I
James.
went home and took my
You're
precautions.
so self-complacent.
The
Why,
dictaphone he had
talk
given
to
me 2
you.
days before to
That's why
adjust
you
something
get the
rather
idea
wrong with it.
that
I persuaded Ackroyd that he had
people
good.
are trying
Instead of
to
sending it back,
help
I
you.
some more what I wanted to it.
Poirot
Took it up with me in my
says
bag. Studied that
I make
evening.
an excellent detective.
Did it? When it was all over, I looked around the room for the
We had a
door.
very interesting
Quite
chat.
satisfied, nothing been
I
left
wonder
undone. The
if
dictaphone was on
Poirot
the table by
found
the
it
window.
interesting.
Time to go off at 9:30.
That
The
was
mechanism
more
of that
valuable
device was
than
rather
anything.
clever, based on the principle alarm
Yeah,
clock.
enough
The
about his
armchair
life.
was pulled out so as to
But
hide
a
it from
mad
the door.
nephew of his.
I never
You
dreamed
know
that
that
Parker
Prince
would
Paul of
notice.
Mauritania, the one who just married the dancer?
noticed that
Well,
shade.
I do not know
Certainly
her.
would
You
not
do
have
not
remembered
know her, and I do not
Poirot
care
and
to hear
Dustin.
about her or about his mad nephew
Having an
either.
American sailor with a toothache call me from King's
Yes,
Abbot
you
that
ain't
night was a stroke of genius.
Questions.
No way for anyone listening to have told that it was not Parker.
I have a little theory.
Still don't know how Poirot thought that one out.
Mr. Poirot didn't ask.
My only
but
regret is about
Whom do you
Caroline.
suspect?
Yet
I don't suspect
I
anybody.
feel I can trust
I
Poirot.
know. Parker
She'll
was
never
here
know
in
the
your
truth.
surgery
I'm
in
glad
the
of that. I
morning
shouldn't
with
like
the
her to know. She's
murder.
fond of me, and then too, she's proud.
He's sure to have taken some.
I guess it would be
Matter
brief
of
to
fact,
her, but
that's in my theory right along.
brief part.
Roger Ackroyd was poisoned in his food that
I
night.
finished writing. I shall enclose this whole manuscript in
You know
an
that as well as
envelope.
I do.
After
Visit Poirot.
death to make a false clue.
I examined the body,
I
and I know
know,
what I'm
because
talking
I'm
about. That wound
tired.
wasn't inflicted after death. It was a
Take
cause
some
of death.
sleeping powders.
And don't look so omniscient.
Because I'm
You're
very
telling me
tired.
you know more about medicine than I
I
do.
will take more sleeping
Perhaps you
powders
think you
than
could
I
take
should.
over my practice.
Oh, don't be ridiculous. You know I
More
happen
than
to like it.
anybody should. I suppose I ought to feel sorry. I am sorry. Sorry that Hercule Poirot ever
That
came
afternoon,
to King's
Caroline
Abbot
had
to
a
grow his
mahjong
cucumbers.
party made up of her little group of village gossipers, in whose opinion, I now learn, Grace Dayton was mysteriously concealed somewhere in Cranchester, big town near us.
But that's true.
Miss Gannick's maid is privileged to the addition of a grave while taking a walk large black cart.
This concludes our Campbell Playhouse presentation of the murder of Roger Ackroyd.
Mr. Poirot had been
In just a moment,
invited
Orson
to my
Welles will
dinner.
return to the microphone with our guest of the
Caroline
evening,
believes
Edna
whenever
May
possible
Oliver.
in getting
Meanwhile,
that
I'd like to
information
take just time enough to say this to every woman
A
listening.
little more raspberry
We
shake,
at Campbell's
Mr.
know
Poirot.
good cooking.
No circumstances.
And so, of
I
course,
am
do you.
already a man of a...
Speaking therefore as one
corpulence
good
of
cook to another,
would hardly
We'd
become
like
me
you to
if I,
try our chicken soup.
Well,
Try it, if you will, in the
yes, there
same
is no harm
friendly
in
yet
it,
critical
I
way
see.
you'd sample a
Yes,
neighbor's
you
good
are,
dish,
Mr. Poirot.
or send in one of your own for her to
I
try.
might have my first help.
If you'll do
I
that,
thought we thought, James.
I know you'll find this
There you
soup
are.
deep
Thanks.
and full and rich in
Mr.
chicken
Poirot,
flavor,
what
from
do
the
you
first
think
spoonful
about
to the last
Grace
delicious
now?
drop.
what I think would
Indeed, I
scarcely
promise
be
you,
regarded as
just as sure as you like chicken,
courtroom,
you
mademoiselle.
like Campbell's chicken soup.
You are
And now
invited.
here is Orson Welles with Edna May Oliver.
Never mind,
You have a
Orson
theory,
Welles.
I
What
don't
about
have a
me,
theory.
Hercule Poirot?
I know.
Miss Oliver, have I not
Don't
the little
meddle
gray
about
cells?
him, but you don't understand. You and your grey cells. If you ask me, I think
Yes,
Grace Dayton
mademoiselle.
committed the murder. Number one.
After listening to my
Mr. Ackroyd was
explanation
heard
so
talking
careful,
to someone especially after listening to your
half-past nine.
exclamation so
Point
careful.
number
two. Now, in the days when I was during the
Scotland Yard.
No, RKO.
through the window as
You and your wonderful mother. Why, when I was a
Point number
detective, no Mr. Ackroyd.
No sooner did I establish the identity of the murderer.
Nervous that evening.
He was murdered.
Could have only admitted someone he knew.
It is well
Point
for
number
you,
4.
Miss Oliver, to belittle the genius of Hercule Poirot. But remember this. Hercule Poirot always laughs last.
Was in a script.
I laugh last.
Oh.
One other thing.
I accept that as a laugh. I
have observed the proceedings here in the studio, and I have detected a circumstance which has indubitably escaped you are untrained to
You
watch.
have found that out for me. Thank you.
Almost.
Thank you. You are sure, mademoiselle, they were Barnard black.
Not only did I discover that the gentleman who told the story, Dr. Shepard, was himself the murderer of Roger Ackroyd. You mean... But I now reveal to you that he was enacted in Mr. Wells' little anecdote by none other than that beloved portrayer of dramatic roles, that celebrated delineator of character, that unparalleled purveyor of protean portraiture, that internationally celebrated...
You refer to Orson Welles, I take it. Race to win.
I do.
The man who blackmailed Mrs. Ferrars. Now, I would like to be allowed a little observation of my own. The second motive, the certainty of a great inheritance to Master Ackroyd's death.
What? The third motive,
I'm not
Caroline?
finished. Very simple. Very simple. Mr. Ackroyd's violent disapproval of Rafe's proposed marriage to Miss Poirot.
Well, after listening to you, Caroline, I'd say the case is very black against
Attend,
it.
Mr. Poirot. James, I laugh last.
Good night, Edna May Oliver. And may I say, I hope that this will not be the last time that you'll put me in my place in this program.
This is President Mrs. Ackroyd, Flora, Raymond Saunders.
In tonight's Campbell Playhouse production of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, the role of Caroline Shepard was played by Edna May Oliver. The part of Roger Ackroyd was played by Alan Napier, Mrs. Ackroyd by Brenda Forbes, and Flora Ackroyd by Mary Taylor. George Coulouris was heard as Inspector Hempstead, Ray Collins as Mr. Raymond, and Everett Sloan as Parker the butler. Dr. James Shepard, who committed the murder, was played by Orson Welles, and Hercule Poirot, who arrested Dr. Shepard,
You please answer to your names.
The music for tonight's production, with the exception of the Noel Coward melodies, was composed and, of course, conducted by Bernard Herrmann.
Yes, but I wanted to stay
Now, Mr.
down
Wells, I see we have just a moment. Can we have a word about next week's story?
Miss Flora.
Yes.
Say, Poirot, what's the meaning of all this?
The list I have just
Next
read
week, ladies
is
and
the
gentlemen,
list of suspected persons.
It will be our proud pleasure to give
Every
you
one
the
of you
Garden of
present
Valor,
had the opportunity to
starring
kill
Claudette
Mr.
Colbert.
Ferrars.
I won't stand for this. I'm going.
Robert
will
Hitchens'
not
masterpiece,
go,
both as a
madame.
book and a play, has
Until
engaged
you have
the
heard
affections
what
of the
I have
people
to
of the
say.
world for 35 years.
I
till it
clear
paints
my
a story
throat
of a great
again.
love and a great
And now I
renunciation.
commence at the beginning.
If Miss
Until
Colbert
now,
is
ladies
listening
and
in,
gentlemen, we have all been
I
trying
wanted
to answer
know
to
how
ourselves
eagerly we're all
one
looking forward to
principal
the privilege
question.
of having her with us.
Who
in
was
Campbell
in the
Playhouse.
room with Mr. Ackroyd at 9:30?
No other actress that I know is more
Dr.
ideally
Shepard,
suited than Miss
since I
Colbert
myself
for the
can
part
prove
of
that he was at
Dominey,
home. Not
the
Miss
English
Flora,
girl who found in the great
nor
Sahara
Mrs.
Desert
Ackroyd,
the love that
nor
gave the final
Mr.
meaning
Raymond,
to
with
her life.
whose actions on that evening we are well
Until then.
acquainted, nor Parker,
Next
who
Sunday
has
in
furnished me
Colbert
with
in the
a
Garden of Valor.
satisfactory alibi.
My
Who
sponsors,
then?
the makers of Campbell Soups, and all
This
of us here in the
is the
Campbell
part of
Playhouse.
Hercule Poirot,
Remain
the
obedient.
cleverest, the most audacious question. Was anyone with him?
You tried to get a liar, Poirot. Somebody think you heard voices. I think you heard the words Mr. Ackroyd speak.
Mr. Raymond, the words that Mr. Ackroyd said. The calls on my birth have been so frequent of late that I believe it is impossible for me to accede to your request. Does nothing strike you as odd about them?
The makers of
This
Campbell
style,
Soups join
for
Orson
No,
Welles
he frequently
in
dictated
inviting you to be
me
with us in the
exactly
Campbell
same
Playhouse
That is
again next
precisely
Sunday
what I
evening
seek to arrive at.
when we bring you the Garden of Valor.
Any man
with
use
Claudette
such a
Colbert
phrase
as our
in
guest
talking
star.
to another, huh?
Meanwhile, if
I
you've
think
enjoyed
not.
tonight's Campbell
My
Playhouse
friends, you've all
presentation,
forgotten one thing.
won't you tell your grocer so
Stranger
tomorrow
called at the house in
when
the
you order
proceeding.
Campbell's
You can
chicken
defer
soup?
me represented. You
This is
remember,
Ernest
Mr.
Chappell
Raymond?
saying thank you and good night.
What you think?
Mr. Ackroyd had promised to invest in a dictaphone, you remember. Me, I had the curiosity to inquire of the company in question. Their
is the
reply, Mr.
Columbia
Raymond,
Broadcasting
was that Mr.
System.
Ackroyd did purchase a dictaphone from their representative. Why he concealed the matter from you, his confidential secretary, I do not know.
Must have meant to surprise me with it. He had quite a childish love of surprising people.
Oh, there's only one man who could have done it.
You mean Rafe Payton?
Mother! Oh, let's face it. If he's innocent, he should be able to prove it. If he isn't...
If only he'd come forward.
That is your advice, Mr. Raymond? That he should come forward?
Certainly. Do you know where he is?
Me? I know everything. Remember that. The truth of the telephone call, of the footprints on the windowsill, of the hiding place of Ray Peyton.
Where is he?
Not very far away.
Where?
In Cranchester?
Where?
No. He is not in Cranchester. He is here, in the doorway of this room.
Ray!
But it's Peyton.
Poirot, my darling.
Have I not told you all at least 36 times that it was useless to conceal things from Hercule Poirot? That always I discover the little secret. It is my business. From Dr. Shepard's sister Caroline, ladies and gentlemen, I learned that the doctor and Ray Peyton, they are old friends. Dr. Shepard knows that things look very black against his friend Peyton. He tells him the whole story.
Yes, he did. He explained to me how suspicion was bound to fall on me, and I had no real alibi.
And with the best of intentions, people sometimes make errors. That's why Dr. Shepard consented to do what he could to help Mr. Peyton. He was successful in hiding him from the police.
Where? In his own house?
No, indeed, Mr. Raymond. You should ask yourself the question that I, Hercule Poirot, did. If the good doctor is concealing the young man, what place would he choose? It must necessarily be somewhere near at hand. I think of Cranchester, a hotel. No. Lodgings, even more emphatically, no. Where then? I have it. A nursing home. I make inquiries. Yes, at one of them, a patient was brought there by the doctor himself early on Saturday morning. That patient, I had no difficulty in identifying him as Ray Peyton. He arrived at my house yesterday, and now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the point of this evening's meeting. Ray Peyton says he is innocent of the killing of Roger Ackroyd.
Oh, I am. I swear by heaven I am.
Please, Mr. Peyton, please. You have just heard Mr. Peyton declare he is innocent. Yet he has 3 motives for the murder and no alibi.
Well, I certainly don't see how you can sit there.
I am possessing the floor, Mrs. Ackroyd. Listen carefully, everybody. To save Mr. Peyton, the real criminal must confess. I speak to you, Hercule Poirot. I know that the murder of Mr. Ackroyd is in this room now, at this table, tonight. Tomorrow in the morning, the truth goes to the police.
You mean you know who?
Yes. At the moment, I know. I alone. For the murder of Roger Ackroyd, there is only one way out. And that way does not lead to freedom. And it is to the murderer now that I speak. This is a matter of life and death. And I, Hercule Poirot, am not joking. Good night.
James, what are you doing out there in the hall?
Just hanging my overcoat, my dear.
Well, aren't you coming in to chat?
I'm very tired, Caroline.
But at least you can tell me what happened last night.
Mr. Poirot told us all about his little gray cells again.
Oh, does he think Rafe Peyton is guilty?
No.
Well, he's crazy.
You can go over and tell him so in the morning. Good night, Caroline. I'm very tired. My arm aches from writing. I've written it all out. Now Peyton will be cleared. As I think back, I'm not quite certain why I urged Ackroyd to read that letter before it was too late. Perhaps I subconsciously realized that with a pig-headed chap like that, I had best chance of getting him not to read it. His nervousness that night was interesting psychologically. He knew danger was close at hand, yet he never once suspected me as the blackmailer of Mrs. Ferrars. The dagger was an afterthought. I'd thought of a very little weapon of my own, but I saw the dagger lying on the silver table. It occurred to me how much better it would be to use a weapon that couldn't be traced to me. I suppose I must have meant to murder him all along. As soon as I'd heard of Mrs. Ferrars' death, I felt convinced that she'd have told him everything before she died. So I went home and took my precautions. The dictaphone he had given me 2 days before to adjust. Something gone a little wrong with it, and I persuaded Ackroyd to let me have a go at it instead of sending it back. I did what I wanted to it. Took it up with me in my bag. Studied that evening. When it was all over, I looked around the room for the door. Quite satisfied. Nothing had been left undone. The dictaphone was on the table by the window. Time to go off at 9:30. The mechanism of that little device was rather clever, based on the principal alarm clock, and the armchair was pulled out so as to hide it from the door. I never dreamed that Parker would notice that chair. Certainly would not have remembered Poirot hadn't asked him. Having the American sailor with a toothache call me from King's Abbot that night is a stroke of genius. There's no way for anyone listening to have told that it was not Parker. I still don't know how Poirot found that one out. My only regret is about Caroline, and yet I feel I can trust Poirot. She'll never know the truth, and I'm glad at that. I shouldn't like her to know she's fond of me, and then, too, she's proud. My death will be a grief to her, but grief passes. When I've finished writing, I shall enclose this whole manuscript in an envelope, address it to Poirot. And now, because I'm tired, take some sleeping powders. Because I'm very tired, I will take more sleeping powders than I should. More than anybody should. I suppose I ought to feel sorry. I am sorry. Sorry that Hercule Poirot ever came to King's Abbot to grow his cucumbers.
This concludes our Campbell Playhouse presentation of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. In just a moment, Orson Welles will return to the microphone with our guest of the evening, Edna May Oliver. Meanwhile, I'd like to take just time enough to say this to every woman listening. We at Campbell's know good cooking, and so, of course, do you. Speaking, therefore, as one good cook to another, we'd like you to try our chicken soup. Try it, if you will, in the same friendly yet critical way you'd sample a neighbor's good dish or send in one of your own for her to try. And if you'll do that, I know you'll find this soup deep and full and rich in chicken flavor from the first spoonful to the last delicious drop. Indeed, I promise you, just as sure as you like chicken, you like Campbell's chicken soup. And now, here is Orson Welles with Edna May Oliver.
Never mind, Orson Welles. What about me, Hercule Poirot? Miss Oliver, have I not the little gray cells?
You and your gray cells. If you ask me, I think Rafe Peyton committed the murder.
After listening to my explanation so careful?
Especially after listening to your exclamation so careful. Now, in the days when I was a detective...
Scotland Yard?
No, RKO. You and your one little murder. Why, when I was a detective, no sooner did I establish the identity of the murderer than he was murdered, and I had to start all over again.
It is well for you, Miss Oliver, to belittle the genius of Hercule Poirot. But remember this. Hercule Poirot always laughs last. Attend. I laugh last. Ha, ha, ha.
I accept that as a laugh. Go on.
I have observed the proceedings here in the studio, and I have detected a circumstance which has indubitably escaped you who are untrained to watch for such things. Almost it had escaped me myself. Not only did I discover that the gentleman who told the story, Dr. Shepard, was himself the murderer of Roger Ackroyd, but I now reveal to you that he was enacted in Mr. Wells' little anecdote by none other than that beloved portrayer of dramatic roles, that celebrated delineator of character, that unparalleled purveyor of protean portraiture, that internationally celebrated...
You refer to Orson Welles, I take it, Mr. Welles?
I do.
Now, I would like to be allowed a little observation of my own. Excuse me, Poirot. Avez-vous la bloom de matin?
What?
I'm not finished yet. Où est le chapeau de ma mère? That's all right, Mr. Poirot. I just wanted to see if you could really speak French. Attend, Mr. Poirot. I laugh last.
Good night, Edna May Oliver. And may I say I hope that this will not be the last time that you'll put me in my place in this program.
In In tonight's Campbell Playhouse production of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, the role of Caroline Shepard was played by Edna May Oliver. The part of Roger Ackroyd was played by Alan Napier, Mrs. Ackroyd by Brenda Forbes, and Flora Ackroyd by Mary Taylor. George Coulouris was heard as Inspector Hempstead, Ray Collins as Mr. Raymond, and Everett Sloan as Parker the butler. Dr. James Shepard, who committed the murder, was played by Orson Welles, and Hercule Poirot, who arrested Dr. Shepard, was played by Orson Welles. The music for tonight's production, with the exception of the Noel Coward melodies, was composed and, of course, conducted by Bernard Herrmann. And now, Mr. Wells, I see we have just a moment. Can we have a word about next week's story?
Next week, ladies and gentlemen, it will be our proud pleasure to give you The Garden of Allah, starring Claudette Colbert. The Robert Hitchens masterpiece, both as a book and a play, has engaged the affections of the peoples of the world for 35 years with its ageless story of a great love and a greater renunciation. If Miss Colbert is listening in, I want her to know how eagerly we're all looking forward to the privilege of having her with us in the Campbell Playhouse. No other actress that I know is more ideally suited than Miss Colbert for the part of Dominique, the English girl who found in the great Sahara Desert the love that gave the final meaning to her life. And so until then, till next Sunday in Claudette Colbert in the Garden of Allah, my sponsors, the makers of Campbell Soups, and all of us here in the Campbell Playhouse remain obediently yours.
The makers of Campbell Soups join Orson Welles in inviting you to be with us in the Campbell Playhouse again next Sunday evening when we bring you The Garden of Allah with Claudette Colbert as our guest star. Meanwhile, if you have enjoyed tonight's Campbell Playhouse presentation, won't you tell your grocer so tomorrow when you order Campbell's Chicken Soup? This is Ernest Chappell saying thank you and good night. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.